What's up? Zay's Garage back here for another one. So you'll notice there's two things different. One, I'm actually in a garage. Previously I did not have a garage and it made the channel name kinda awkward. I saw you guys comment on my videos and say, why is it called Zay's Garage? He doesn't have a garage. Now this channel name makes sense. Second of all, I have a 2018 BMW M3 competition. I purchased this car 6 months ago in Orlando, Florida, because the market for these cars are absolutely crazy. I live in Boston. All the ones that are near me are priced at a ridiculous premium right now because of the shortages all across the economy. This car has the M Performance package. It came with about 34,000 miles and I paid about 57. Compared to what's being sold around me right now, it's an absolute steal. So, as you may know, this channel was originally based on a 340 F30 generation BMW. I have now since made the switch to the F80 and boy has it been a pretty amazing switch. So, I'm going to go over the pros and the cons of owning this car after just 6 months. Let's go on ahead and dive into the video. Before we get into it, if you could please like this video and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss my future content. I'm going to be doing a lot of content with my M3 and I'm going to be talking about all different types of BMW. You do not want to miss a beat. So first things first, I want to clear it up. This car is absolutely better than the G80. The G80 is an ugly car. It has always... No. That was a joke. This car is not better than the G80. Yes, it may look better than the G80, but the G80 performs it on all regards. So I want to premise my conversation by saying that I am not one of those people. On a serious note, let's start off about this. If you come from an F30 generation BMW and you step up to an F80, you are going to immediately notice how much better this car performs. From the very basics of driving dynamics to the steering, to the way that the car just feels as it goes around a corner, you are going to absolutely notice that this car is sharper, it is more dynamic, and it gives you more of an invigorating feeling. The F30 platform car just feels loose all around the board. And if you watched my channel before, you know that I did multiple mods to help get my 340 to handle better. I had to do coilovers, I had to do better wheels and tires. There were some other things that I just didn't get to in that build, but it needed all of that to even perform somewhat close to what the F80 is. And the truth is it can't even perform like the F80 because the F80 is built ground up to handle better. So that is the first thing that you're going to notice, and that's the first pro of owning this car. Second, the road presence in this car is unbelievable. When this car comes down the street, you notice it. You look, people turn their heads. They're like, wow, this is an impressive looking car. From the wide rear hip arches to the bigger wheels, to the more aggressive aero and the body kit, you are going to notice that this car has a much better street presence than the F30 does. Now, the F30 can look a little rough, and especially if you don't have the M Sport body kit. It can look like a plebeian, 3 Series sedan. It doesn't look anything special. When I had my 340, in all honesty, people did not even take it seriously because, even though it had the B58 and with my tune I was pushing 450, it didn't look like it was necessarily, a real sports car. So a lot of people don't notice F30s because they just slide under the radar for their looks. You will not have that problem with the F80. Third point, this car will give you street cred. There is no doubt about that. This car just oozes like history and like pedigree. So no matter where you go, people will point out that, wow, that's a cool car, that's an M3. That is not something that's going to happen with your F30. This car absolutely is just a killer when it comes to going to car meets, shows, to track days. Everywhere you go, people are gonna notice. When I go to the gym, people recognize me just by the car that I'm driving. I'm in the locker room, people are like, yo, you drive the F80, bro? And I'm like, yeah. And like, yeah, this type of stuff happens all the time. People that don't even know that much about cars will see that it has an M3 badge on the back, and they'll be like, oh, that guy's cool. That's a cool car, you know? So if you plan to own an F80 or you're coming for F30, that is a change that you're gonna have to get used to. People are going to call you out all the time, and sometimes, in some cases, be jealous of your M3 because it is such a cool car. Fourth, from a reliability perspective, I have not had any problems with this car. The S55 has been very, very reliable, and I've put about 10,000 miles on this car in about 6 months. Yeah, I know that's a lot of miles, but these cars are meant to be driven, not to be sitting around. So, yes, I put that amount, and I haven't had a single problem. I haven't had to do much of anything besides oil changes. That goes to show you just how far BMW has come since the N54. And when the N55 came out, it became, you know, kind of more of a reliability staple. Yes, it had its problems, but it was much, much better than the N54 was. And the S55 is a better step up. Now, this is a 2018 model year, and it still has a warranty, so it's likely that that's the reason why I may have not seen any issues. But nonetheless, for driving the wheels off this car, it has performed pretty well. My fifth point, this car has 4 doors. This is what makes it better in my mind than a 4 Series or the M4. You have that extra capability to carry people along for the joyride that is this car. And that is something that really makes this car a usable, everyday sports car that, you know, I can have fun in, but I can also bring my friends along and, you know, go grocery shopping, etc., etc., etc. Same thing you might see, you know, from having an F30. So now we are going to get into the negatives, the things that have not been so good about owning this car. And, well, the first thing that I want to get into is the crank hub. This is the biggest gripe I think ever.
Not the cap.
I am just kidding. The crank hub is not a big problem. It is probably the most overblown, out of proportion issue that owners of this car deal with and face with. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, I'm about to buy an M3. I need to get my crank hub done before I do everything. No, that is not the case. This car, if you own this car, you do not necessarily need to do the crank hub. It is honestly fine to mod this car without doing the crank hub. Some people like to do it for extra, you know, assurance, extra care, but I really do not think that this issue is as big as people put it out to be. Now, I think there's some things that you should be cautious of, obviously, right? Now, if you're running 600, 700 horsepower, that's when it's found that most of the cases with the spinning the crank hub have been found. Now, that probably, you know, is not an ideal thing to do without having a crank, you know, upgrade on this car. But for the person who wants to do a stage 1 mod, or they want to keep it stock, maybe even they just want to do downpipes and go boot mod stage 2, I don't necessarily think you should do the crank hub. I think a better proposition is doing the crank hub capture bolt. This is something that Vargas Turbo Technologies offers for this car, and it is a lot cheaper than spending 2 G's on parts plus labor for a crank hub. You can pick one up on Turner Motorsports, and I'll actually put one in the description below. It's something that I actually am planning to get for this car once I begin to start modding it, and I think it is a much easier, simpler route to go with this car as opposed to getting a crank hub done, especially if you're not planning to do 600 horsepower, E85, etc., etc. So, in my second negative of the car, it's a bittersweet one. The thing is, this car is incredibly powerful, it is incredibly capable, but the problem is, it's just a little bit too capable for everyday use. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. This car is 450 horsepower, it is rear-wheel drive. those are specs that, you know, may be a little bit tough for somebody like me who lives in the New England where there's snow and it's really, really rainy. Most days I can't use the full capabilities of this car. Now, if you're in the South, that's a little bit better. But the second point I want to make around this argument is that if you have this kind of power, by the time you get going, you're doing like 75, 100 miles an hour, right? You know, when you take off. And it's just, everything happens so quickly. The car is so, you know, it accelerates so fast and it is so aggressive. So you will notice that most of the time this car goes beyond the limits of the, you know, of the road, wherever you might be, whether it is warm or whether it's cold. And sometimes I get a little bit bored with that. I also have a dual clutch transmission, so I don't have all the fun that somebody who has a 6-speed has, but nonetheless, this car is just a little bit too fast for everyday roads. I just feel like I'm this big fish in a little pond. That's the best way to describe it. And as I was going into before, rear-wheel drive is kind of a pro and it's a con of this car. Yes, it gives you that natural dynamic flow that you would expect from a high-performance BMW, but for people like me who live in New England, it is a struggle during the wintertime. It is getting a little bit colder around here, so I won't be able to enjoy this car as much as I usually do during the summer months. So it's kind of like half a pro, half a con, if you know what I mean. My fourth point is, and it really annoys me, inside of this car, there is not that big of a difference between an F30 and an F80. The only main difference is, you know, there's trims on the steering wheel, trim on the center console and the dashboard and the seats. And, you know, the fact that you can get extended leather. There's some special F30 models where you can get extended leather. I don't know if they're available here in the United States. But besides those things, there really is not a large difference between those interiors. And that kind of irks me a little bit because the F80 costs so much more than an F30 and you're essentially paying for seats and trim. I don't know if that makes you kind of upset, but it makes me upset. So a very controversial thing about the F80 is the sound. Now, I personally don't mind the sound of this car. Do I prefer the B58 sound more? Absolutely. It is more deeper, you know, it has kind of more of like an aggressive snarl to it. Another point I want to make is I think that the carbon roof on these cars are just a little bit overhyped. I don't necessarily think that you need the carbon roof. I would honestly prefer the sunroof. It is really dark in this interior, especially when you have tinted windows and they're all up at nighttime. It gets really dark here in New England and it is just miserable in this car. The interior lighting of this car is not as good as some of the newer generation BMW, so I feel like I'm in a dungeon. If you get this car, yes, the carbon roof gives you that cred, but in all honesty, the sunroof is more usable. And people are gonna fight me with this because the carbon roof is the enthusiast choice. But I actually prefer usability over just being cool. And that's just me. Maybe that's why I wasn't the coolest kid in high school. So overall, those are my points around the F80. I named some really good pros, I named some really fair cons. Some of you might disagree with, but overall, the 6 months of owning this car has been a great experience. I think one problem, ultimately, in summary, this car has is that I think they are just a little bit too expensive for what they are right now. Now, this car is amazing, it handles wonderfully, but with the inflation and way the market has driven the value of these cars up, paying 60 to 70K for a low mileage F80 honestly does not make that much sense. There are a lot of cars that you can get for that are honestly comparable or even better than the F80 from a performance standpoint. And I say performance standpoint because if I'm considering something like a Mustang or a Camaro, yes, those cars are trash on the inside and the F80 beats them in every regard. But performance-wise, if you slap a supercharger on one of those or something like that, you have a less expensive car with more power than F80 that handles comparably with some mods. And you pay a premium to become a member of the F80 club. And right now, I think that premium is a little bit too high. Now, I love BMWs, so I paid that premium. But if you're in the market for one of these, I think this is something you should really think about. With all that being said, guys, if you stayed this long, thank you for watching. And as I said before, let me know what your thoughts are, and please subscribe to the channel. We're trying to grow this thing and make it big. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.